let me know down in the chat, and I'm more than happy to turn that off. So what's this session about? Well, as I said in the description and the title, the idea of this session is talking about Moodle and Mahara, what I call the ultimate LMS. Moodle has parts of the components from learning management. Mahara has other parts, other components of learning management. The problem is that these days, especially when we talk about formative and summative assessment, I really start to think we're in a position we're going to need to have tools that are specialised in these fields. Now, the fact that you're here at iMoot, I don't have to tell you what Moodle is. However, many of you may not know what Mahara is. Now, what I'm going to do is ask you to raise hands. I haven't turned a poll on here, but if you haven't noticed, up the very top of the screen, there's a little symbol. I'm going to point this up there somewhere. A little man with his hand up looking like this. If you click on that, you can raise your hand, or even better, you can actually go through and do an agree. If you would actually agree if you've used Mahara before. So I'm interested to know who's actually used Mahara. Not seen it, who's using Mahara. Okay, so not overly many. All right, let's clear that. Next question. Who here has never heard of Mahara? You're here because you want to find out what it is. If you could please go and click on agree if you have not heard of Mahara before. Okay, so we've got people who have heard of it, but very few people who are using it. That's great. That'll allow me to kick in. So look, let's start the basics. Why these two things work so well together. This is a slide that if anybody's seen me present before, you've seen before. I often refer to Moodle as an e-learning Swiss Army knife. The fact that many of you are probably Moodle practitioners, you know what I'm talking about. When you turn editing on in Moodle, you hit with this wealth of options. 15, 18 activities, 8 different types of resources, and of course, if you're using plugins, your list is going to get even bigger and bigger and bigger. I have a troll site here which I think has about 30 activities in it, which is probably getting a little bit mental. But again, anybody who knows me wouldn't be surprised by that statement. Moodle, however, has a very serious side to it. It's a teacher-driven system. It's a place that we scaffold our learning, that we're going to go through and put our resources, put our assessments, what we want the students to do, and they work inside our structure, our mechanisms. And look, we talk about formative and summative assessment. That's fantastic. We want directed assessment models. And yes, we do have blogs, and we do have wikis, and we do have forums for for the more reflective style of learning. But the reality is that the teacher sets the scene. The teacher sets the mode. It is a teacher-centered system. Yet over the past couple of years, we've really seen this shift towards the idea of student-centered practice, and portfolios have started to come into the mix. And Mahara has been my favourite for many years. And look, I'll be honest, the reason I fell in love with Mahara in the first place is that Mahara shares much the same development team as Moodle did in the early days. For those of you who aren't aware, Mahara is predominantly built by Catalyst New Zealand, who are a large open source developer, of which Christina, who is in here in the room, is a member of that organisation. So I'm actually hoping that as people have questions, Christina, please feel free to answer. You know me well enough. I'm never offended by people who have more knowledge than I. We talk about gurus of the Mahara world. Christina is certainly one of the, if not the absolute guru of Mahara. And so Moodle and Mahara have both had this start with Catalyst and put lots of code into it. And of course, Mahara is another open source project. Again, for those of you who aren't familiar, Mahara uses the same kind of license that Moodle does. It is a true open source project. By that I mean there are some projects that give you the core for free and then you have to buy modules. Mahara sits very much the same way that Moodle does. It's completely free. Download it, install it on a server. There are partners that can support you. The difference in actions of how it works, however, is who controls that Mahara environment. Before I talk about that, the reason I bring up this slide is that one of the roles of Mahara is where Moodle is teacher-centered and the teacher builds. Mahara is all about the students bringing their life together. And so a large part of it's about integrating other different toolkits. I'm very keen in this presentation to show as much as I can. And while this has very little to do with the subject I'm talking about at the moment, I'm also very keen to point out that it's one of the ladies here in this room. Andrea and I have actually spoken about Mahara quite a few times at her workplace. And one of the arguments that she and others have thrown my way is that, well, portfolio is great, but it just becomes another walled garden. We say we want to create a place that students can work, but then they're stuck inside that environment, and if they leave that environment, they lose it. And so I actually always keen to bring up this slide. Mahara is one of the systems that uses what's called Leap 2A. It's a standard for moving portfolios around. It's a bad analogy, but if you know SCORM, SCORM is the standard for the creation of e-learning activity, and a SCORM object can be plugged into Moodle, into Blackboard, into WebCT, into Janison. Well, Leap 2A is meant to be the standard for portfolio, and already tools like Mahara and PebblePad and others are starting to use this. And so even if a student starts in one portfolio and moves, if those systems are both using the same standard, they can take that portfolio with them. I'm always just keen to highlight that because it's a big barrier for some people when they think, great, we're going to create a portfolio, but we don't want to lock it down. So this session, what's it about? Well, we're going to be talking about Moodle, a very unimaginative name. The idea, of course, comes from it's a combination of Mahara and Moodle. And many of you are probably aware of it already. But what I want to talk about is the importance of the integration and what it does. When we say things are connected, we're not just talking about single sign-on. If Mahara was just a single click and they don't have to create another account, look, that's kind of cool, but that doesn't make a good system. And what I want to talk about in this presentation is what's available now. They actually tie these two systems together. They actually make them powerful, make them work as one learning system rather than as two separate entities. And so the objective of this talk is to highlight as many of those features as I can in the time that I have. The points I was making earlier, and I really want to reinforce this before we move on. Why Julian's describing these as e-learning systems. I think about Mahara not just as a portfolio where students have reflective practice and resume. I'm actually going to take it a bit further than that. So if I'm talking about these things as part of an e-learning system, how do we avoid crossover? Well, it's really simple to think of it this way. Moodle is built by the educator, and one of Moodle's catchcries is it's by educators for educators. It's a teacher-centered, teacher-driven scenario. And don't get me wrong, if you know your way around, you can do some really cool tricks with Moodle to make them more student-centered. I quite often give students teacher rights to individual resources, or creating custom roles. So you could do things like this student will be a moderator of this forum, and this student's going to be managing the peer review process in a workshop. You could do some really cool things with permissions. But out of the box, the way that most people use Moodle, it's a teacher-centered scaffolding tool that we put our learning into, that the student's going to work within that framework. Portfolio tools, particularly like Mahara, are the exact opposite of that methodology. Mahara is not teacher-centered in any way, shape, or form. In fact, by default, it doesn't even recognize teachers. Again, I don't want to confuse. There are what are called teacher roles in Mahara, and we can have permissions. But what I mean by that is, by default, when people move between the two systems, you're not immediately seen as a teacher of the student telling them what to do. This is their portfolio. Now, I want to take a quick stop here because we talk about digital portfolio. You speak to 15 different people, you will get 17 different answers to what digital portfolio means. Digital portfolio is a very personal process to organizations. Mahara I quite like because it really is a bit of a jack of all trades, and it's a customizable jack of all trades. What Mahara does is allows us to do things such as traditional portfolio. We're talking about artifact storage, things that I've created that I want to store. We're talking about reflective practice. Yes, we do have a blogging that they call it a journal tool, which makes a lot more sense to many adult educators. They can go through and they can reflect on. It has a resume builder so that adult learners can go through and store an online resume, not just of work and career goals, but also maybe publications and organisations they're parts of, and so forth. But on top of that, Mahara also provides a community of practice. It provides basic social networking. You'll hear me use a line later on. I call it the anti-Facebook, and I'll certainly explain that as we go a bit more forward. That annoying beep you may have just heard is the importance of me turning off my Twitter before I do a talk like this. So, having just recognised that portfolio means meeting to different people, what all of them have in common is that they are student-centered. They're driven by the student. They react to what the student wants it to do. And the annoying thing about that process is that most educators I speak to are for it. In fact, again, I want to see hands raised. Who here honestly believes in student-centered learning practice? Student driving the learning process. Now, I'm not talking about as a sole entity, but as part of your learning practice. Again, up the top left, give me a tick if you agree or you can disagree. You will not be vilified. I might point and laugh, but you will not be vilified. It's amazing how many teachers restate the query. Who here believes that student-centered practice has a place in the modern classroom, online or offline? Probably more. There we go. It's not good to talk in absolutes. All right. So it's amazing, and most people I speak to would agree with that statement. But yet, in the digital realm, when all of a sudden I say, great, we're going to create a system where the student controls it, all of a sudden the barriers go up. Well, what do you mean? You mean they could upload anything? Yes, they could. You mean they could say anything? Yes, they could. And these aren't increased risks or decreased risks. They're the same risks that we have in face-to-face. But all of a sudden, when the realities of student-centered practice hit, especially administrators and policymakers, it's a very difficult thing to push forward. And again, if we have time at the end of this conversation, at the end of this presentation, I'd like to have a conversation on that because it's something that's very close to my heart is how we can get past that barrier. But that's not what we're here to talk about. So digital portfolio, be it Mahara or PebblePad or any other of these applications that are out there at the moment, most organisations would say that they've been failing. And one of the biggest reasons that they fail is the fact that the processes are disconnected. By disconnected, I mean that, okay, here's our e-learning system. And again, I'm actually intentionally being product neutral here. It could be Moodle or Blackboard or whatever. Here's our e-learning system. In this system, you're going to do the work that we've set. You're going to be assessed the way that we need to assess you. But also, as part of our learning process, we also want to do more of a reflective practice element as well. We want to be able to go through and see more formative and summative. I can't speak anymore. I apologise. I'm getting tired already, and that's not a good thing. We want to have more student-centered practice. But what happens is we say, well, okay, here's a system over here and a system over there. And often it involves double up. Okay, here I want you to create an activity or a resource, and you do it over here in Moodle. And I want you to reflect on it. So they have to go and upload it again to the system over there. If we have to double up a teacher or a student's work, the chances of uptake are slim. So obviously we have context first, but workload plays a strong part of it. And again, many of you who are educators, one of the biggest arguments we hear with online learning is, oh, you mean I have to do something extra, I have to do something different, I'm not being given time allowance for this. It's a biggest barrier. Well, our students have the same barrier. So the reason I want to do a presentation on the Moodle application and what's possible with it now is the fact that it's all about taking away the disconnect, about merging these two systems to make them work as one. Either visually or just procedurally. And that's, I guess, what I want to go through. So I'm not going to read all these out. I've just spent the last 5.5, 10 minutes explaining this, but I bring up this slide here just to really try and show you the differences between these two systems. And again, I could take the word Moodle out and put anything there. I could take the word Mahara out and put anything there. But this slide really explains what are the two elements of this process. And again, I will put this up on SlideShare when we're done here and a link in the course space. So if you want to grab this, please feel free. But what you're seeing here are the key areas of how these two things differ. And if we talk about how they cross over, now I did not come up with this slide. I've been actually trying to find the original author. And again, if Christina knows, I'd like her to tell me because I would like to give attribution where I can. I found this online a couple of years ago because it also shows how these things aren't, joined. They merge. So we talk about the LMS, Learning Management System, or the Virtual Learning Environment. Then we have Personal Learning Environment and Personal Learning Network. Now, again, these are very different things. It's very easy to get caught up in terminology. It's very easy to get caught up in acronyms. But, the network are people that I'm working with. The environment is the environment I'm working within. The learning management system is where things are being done. The virtual learning environment is the environment within which I'm doing my learning management. So they are different terms. But the LMS VLE side, we're talking about that evaluation and transmission. Again, I've already harped on about it, so I'm not going to say it again, but obviously that point of pushing things to the student and assessment. The PLE, PLM side of things is all about that meditation, a reflection, internal focus, maybe a bit of peer review, and acquisition, the collection of data, things that I've created, things that I'm interested in, and creating these artifacts together and categorize in a way that I can access them over time. There's a merge between transmission and reflection. And again, this is why I highlight the important fact that I think these tools need to be combined. And I'll show that in action. And this is my last slide. This is my last slide because I'm very keen to go hands-on and do some demo. But when many organizations talk about integrating apps, again, I don't know how many developers we have in the room, but often we talk about, oh, I'm going to integrate Facebook with Moodle. I'm going to integrate this with that. Many people think of integration and they go no further than hooking the two systems up. Integration is more than just single sign-on between two systems. And that's what the rest of this presentation is going to talk about. So here is where things get interesting. I'm going to stop sharing those slides. I'll turn my camera off, and now I'm going to go and try and share my screen. Now the real challenge here is that my computer has 3 screens. So I need you to tell me right now what it is that you're seeing. Are you seeing a Moodle site, or are you seeing a screen full of multitude of windows? We see the Moodle site. Fantastic. Now, I'm doing all this demo on my local machine. However, in the course, and some of you actually I saw have already explored, I have set up a Moodle instance between my course and a Mahara site I've set up for the conference. And by the way, that Mahara site is going to stay there. So if you actually want to reflect on iMoot, please feel free to use that Mahara site. It's a fully functional site. Great thing about being an organizer of a conference is to get to set up your own technology the way that you want. But to make things easier, I've actually got a demo here on my machine that I just want to walk you through. So what you're seeing here at the moment, let me just log out, is a Moodle site. It does have a custom theme on it. So this is using a theme called Rocket. By the way, use Rocket. It's a fantastic theme. P.S. I wrote it, so I'm a little bit full of myself. This is just a custom theme though, but apart from that, you're looking at a standard Moodle. So I'm going to log in first as a teacher. So here I'm logged in as a teacher. I've got my home page. Up the top here I have a link to called ePortfolio. So the first thing I talk about with integration, if I click on this, it actually has sent me straight through to Mahara. You notice that it has brought my picture in, it has got my name, and it's told me the site that I've come across. So the first thing with integration, while it's not the limit of it, is certainly single sign-on. There is no management, not Vincent Price. Someone doesn't know their pop culture references. It is a good likeness. Sorry, I am an IT person, so therefore I'm a geek, and because of my age, I'm a Doctor Who fan. So in this demo site, all the teachers are the masters from Doctor Who, and all the students are various doctors. It makes it very easy doing demos. If you do know your Doctor Who, student 1 is William Hartnell, student 2... let's not get carried away, we'll be here for hours if I start talking Doctor Who. So yes, we are seeing single sign-on between the two systems. Okay, that's great. As I finish doing this first part of the presentation, I will show you some of the background how to set these things up as well. But at the moment, I want to talk about how we use them rather than how we set them up. What I've actually done here is set up a course. This course is here so I could show some of the features of this Mahara integration. What are you doing? You are watching, Lee. This is sadly not a hands-on area for you because not many people are able to have Connect Open and a website. So I thought if I did some active demos, when this presentation finishes, you can actually explore these same tools in the course. But I certainly don't want to drag people in and out of Connect. I think we'd lose half the people if we tried. Okay, so let's talk about first of all what's going on here. With the Mahara integration out of the box, so I'm not talking about plugins yet, I'm going to talk about some plugins later on, but when you've got Moodle working, the very first thing that Moodle 2 is introduced, and one of my favourite features of Moodle 2 is what's called a repository API. Tech Talk, what the repository API does is gives the methodology for Moodle to be able to talk to external systems for content to be sent from Moodle to that system. Now, with that turned on by the administrator, and again, I know there are people brewing with questions already. I'll come back to how that will set up at the end of the session. But once it's set up by administrator, anything that a student or teacher creates, they can send to a portfolio system. So look, let me come in here. What I've actually got here is a discussion forum. Now you can see I've done this demo before. There's Roger Delgado saying, I like stuff. It's a forum post. This is a standard traditional forum. I want to point out though that because I've turned on portfolios on this system, there's a new button down the bottom right, Export to Portfolio. Students can export from Moodle any piece of work that they create. Now, I want to stress, not work that other people create. They can export any work that they have created. However, a cool thing that I really like, and I honestly don't know if it's a bug or not, I actually would be interested to get Christina's view on this. If it is a bug, I hope it never goes away. By default, teachers can export anything that they have created or anything that their students have created. Why were you just thinking about portfolio for students? I love portfolios for educators. Reflect on your own teaching practice. Reflect on how your students are working with you. If a student's done something that you're particularly proud of, save it in your portfolio to be able to store, reflect, share with peers and so forth. So as teachers, you can also export to portfolio anything that is from your students. All right, so let's show you this in action. So here is Roger Delgado. He's speaking very fluent Swedish here. Anybody from Sweden can probably translate that. It's full of swear words. Export to portfolio, and I can choose the different portfolios that have been made available. Now, I've actually turned on 3 here. File download is one that I so hope that administrators turn on. It's built in. Why do we lock data into Moodle? We all know at the end of a course, Moodle gets wiped. We do a reset. All the work that students have done throughout the year gets lost. Administrators' typical response, oh, but that's right, we have it backed up. It's an invalid argument, but that's great. The teachers have access to that. The institution has access to that. What about the student? Well, the first thing I always turn on, regardless of an institution's particular portfolio practice, is file download. It means that with one click, they can save it to their desktop. And then they can keep it on a shared drive, put it on a thumb drive, burn it to CD, stick it in Dropbox, whatever they want to do. But why we don't turn that on has always bugged me. Let's at least get the student to be able to take the data out once they put it in. Google Docs, which again I'm not going to talk about right now, means that with one click the student or teacher could send this, in this case a forum post, straight to Google Docs with single sign-on. I'll touch on this briefly. We'll come back to it more time at the end if we have it. Why Google Docs? Well, that's a tool that many people use. Portfolio shouldn't necessarily be controlled by the organisation. Portfolio should be where the student lives. And Google Docs is a fantastic digital portfolio. I can store work there, I can share it with others, I can do some collaborative work on it. It does meet the requirements of portfolio use. So some organisations and many people in the state sector are starting to actually get things like Gmail rolled out for all their students. Google Docs is a good way of allowing students to save it in places that they work. But the one we're here to talk about, of course, is Mahara Portfolio. So I'm choosing Mahara Portfolio next. It says, are you sure you want to send it? Yes, I do. And that's it. That is it. I didn't have to go to another system, log into that system, choose where I want to save it. All I had to do is go export to portfolio, choose the option, which by the way, if you only have Mahara, it's just one option. I only had different ones there because I wanted to show you. And it sends it there. And I now have 2 options to either go right back to where I was or with one click, go to my portfolio. And again, I've done this demo a couple of times, but those are the forum posts which are sitting there. And so we've integrated that process of taking artifacts from my e-learning experience and be able to push them straight through to my portfolio. Why is this crucial? If you're in an environment where you have students who go through multiple courses, and it might be a school, we've got year 7, 8, 9, 10, it might be a technical college where they have multiple modules, it might be a university where not only are they doing a bachelor's, but they might stay with us and do a master's and do a doctorate. It's great that we have an e-learning system, but when that course finishes, the student loses access to all that data. But if they're bettering themselves throughout the process, and I'm talking about good old-fashioned traditional portfolio now, where I started off as a bachelor and where I ended up, 20 years down the track in my PhD. So for some of us it's 20 years, I'm sure for many of you it's less than that, but it allows me to keep these things here. And one of the reasons that organisations like portfolio, especially universities, is it gives us a place that students can store this information and reflect as they grow from that entry level right through to the point that they leave. So moving back to my course now, forum was one example, but it could be anything that a student creates. It could be a glossary. It could be an assignment. I can go and upload a file here. Now, this actually may not work because I'm a teacher, so if this doesn't work, I'll log in as a student. I might go through here and upload a photo as an assignment. Maybe not that photo because it's too big. Probably too big as well. There it goes. Once I've gone through and saved an assignment, I can again, with one click, send it to my portfolio. So, actually, I'm just having to make sure I read through here. This is useful for teachers repeating again and again the same courses. Perhaps, no, actually, that's an interesting point, Anna. I hadn't thought of that one. Yes, I think it's a very good point. And the focus getting marks from the students. It's great seeing that that's changing, or at least from my experience. You know, I work with lots of clients, and it's actually great seeing so many names in this room that I recognise. We are seeing a shift now from just assessment-driven to also experiential. Their knowledge is not driven just by the facts that they can recite, but their ability to practice it. And we are seeing more reflective practice coming in, not just in technical colleges, but in universities and schools. I'm seeing reflective practice happening with year fours the other week, so it is seeing a change there. But you are right, the traditional focus was about marks. Let's get the marks and move on. We are seeing a shift. So here we go again. You know, an assignment, I can upload an assignment and then send it straight to my portfolio. Again, it's built into the one process, the one system. We're not doubling up on workload. That's the first thing. But let's take another step. So we've talked about the integration of storing of artifacts. Let me go to my portfolio. I'm going to start a little bit of Mahara sales spiel here, and it's going to be very, very brief because I'd love to do a session on Mahara, but the brilliant thing is that we've got Christina here, so she's going to do some fantastic presentation on the Mahara 1.5, and she'll tell you all the cool features that this thing has in it. And if you attend her session, trust me, you'll be begging to have it installed tomorrow as well. I just want to give a brief overview of the core areas, and the reason why I want to do that, you'll actually then start seeing different ways that we can use it, not just as portfolio, but particularly as a project or resource creation tool. So here's a portfolio, and again, even though I'm still a teacher, I want to point out in Mahara, I'm just a user. We're all users in Mahara. And again, I don't want to oversimplify. Yes, there are things as teacher permissions, and you can go through and allow people to access different things. But by default, everybody is a user, and they're going to choose what they want to do with their portfolio. The first thing I'm going to show you here is what's called the content area. And again, I'm just going to rush through it. And by the way, I should highlight that not everything here is standard. I've got a few plugins. Like Moodle has got plugins as well that make it quite cool. What I want to show you here is that information here is incredibly personal information. Under content, I can put my first name, my last name, my student ID, information that Moodle contains has been brought over, but the rest I have to put in myself. My contact information, fax numbers, phone numbers, where I live, how people can contact me. This is very personal information. And this leads me to my comment from before where I call Mahara the anti-Facebook. Mahara and Moodle do actually share a common thread, which is we want to store artifacts here. We want to be able to share them with others. A problem with Facebook is, of course, that by default, everything's open. If I put something into Facebook, by default, everybody will see it. Mahara is built for e-learning environments. By default, anything I put into Mahara does not show up to anybody. I, as an individual, have to choose who I want to share it with. And that will make sense in a second, but it's an important point. Also leads me to a fantastic joke. Does anybody here actually know why Facebook finally went public? No, they couldn't figure out the privacy settings either. Tish. Now on that bad joke, let's move on. So under content, I can put profile. I can go through and have what I call profile pictures. So I'm having used my mouse there. It'll allow me to have multiple identities. Again, why is this important? Well, depending on who I'm working with, I might choose to have a different identity. If I'm working with my peers, I might have a picture of me and a can of beer in my hand. Sorry, Australian thing for us here. If I'm working with a mentor, I might want a more formal image. If I'm going to be using this for a job interview, I'll have a very formal image. Students can go through and create multiple identities. And it's not about impersonation, it's about the right identity for who they're working with. Obviously, I've got files. And you can see here, I've got images, I've got some case notes, incoming are things that have come from Moodle. I have a journal that I can keep. So as you can see, I'm rather meat focused at the moment. So I've gone through and written a journal entry about a certain subject. Everything I'm doing here is for me at the moment. Not for anybody else, but for me. The reason I stress that is it's when we go to Portfolio that we create pages. Now again, I'm going to be very brief here because I really actually want to encourage you. If you want to find out what Mahara does in detail, especially this new 1.5 version, do make sure you check out Christina's session. But what happens when I create a page is when I create a page, I can then go through and start to assemble things. So here's about me. You can see now I've created a page. I've brought parts of my resume here. I've put my employment history. I've stuck a QR code into here. I've got information about myself. And the great thing about this is that the interface here is very quick and easy to use. I've turned editing on. And to bring content in, at the top I've got these tabs. I've got my journals, my profile, my resume, maybe some external content. To bring information from a source, I just click and drag. Let's say I want to bring my journal and put it here on the right. I could bring in my entire journal, one particular entry, the most recent entry. Let's say I want to show the most recent entry. I can just click and drag, and it'll go through and populate that with my most recent entry. My profile, I think I've already got this here, but just to try and do it again, I want to bring in profile information. I click it, and I choose what information I want to share. I'm hurrying this because I don't want to spend too much time talking about Mahara, but I want you to understand putting pages together is a very simple process. The reason I highlight this part of it so much is that, especially with young adults and children, it's a fantastic way of being able to do project work. Now let me log in as a student. I want to explain this in a bit more detail before we go on, because all of a sudden we start seeing the blend of Mahara back into Moodle. So I'm logging in as student 1. Anybody listening before should be able to tell me who the first doctor was. William Hartnell. So I've logged in as William Hartnell. Now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go to my portfolio as this student and check out the pages that I've created. Now what I've actually done, prepared earlier, is I've created a page called my project page. I've created a page all about my spaceship called the TARDIS, and I've gone through and put all kinds of information. I've got some text here, put a Facebook like button, I put some external media, YouTube clip, and again I'm sure Christina will talk about this because it's all quick and easy to set these things up. This will make me look very disorganized, but this page took me 10 minutes to set up when I was watching the last session. So not that I should explain that, but this was 10 minutes worth of work. Once you know what you're doing, it's very quick to create things. So I've created this. Now, I'm not going to talk about this from a portfolio standpoint. Yes, I could have created this for me or to share with a peer. But the example I want to give you now is that actually I want to now go through and I want to share this for assessment. Why do I want to do that? Well, many of you will have portfolio tasks that you need to assess. Those of you who work in medicine, might need to bring 4 case studies of a patient who's had this kind of symptom and how you've dealt with it. Well, the doctors will keep that, or the nurses will keep that information in their portfolio. But how do I assess that? Portfolios are not built to be assessed, and I'm very vocal about that. If we start assessing portfolio, it loses its focus, it loses its purpose, and people won't use it. One of the reasons we struggle to get people to use e-learning systems is that everything I say might be assessed. Portfolio works because it is not assessed. So how do we get this win-win of we want them to have portfolio, but we also need to assess certain elements of it? And again, anybody who works with trades, anybody here who works with university level student, to be honest, or even now I'm working with kids because it's a nice visual way of creating. Yes, I want you to have a portfolio, but I want you to submit elements of that for assessment. Well, this is where a cool new feature comes in. The next feature I'm about to show you is not standard. It is a plugin. It's a plugin for Moodle. The plugin is actually available from the wiki. I should actually got that on a separate screen here. If you're not familiar with it, Mahara has a fantastic wiki, wiki.mahara.org. And just like Moodle, Mahara has plugins. There's a whole bunch of them in here. What I'm actually showing you in just a second is actually the, it's in here somewhere, Mahara Assignment Submission plugin. Now I'm very happy to point out, and this is where I get on my little soapbox for a second, Pukunui actually joint funded this. We actually helped get this into Moodle. It's actually been around for Moodle 1.9, had to be completely rewritten by Moodle 2. And also give credit where it's due, the people at Catalyst New Zealand actually built this. It's a fantastic piece of code that goes through and brings these two systems together. So for those of you who need to write it down, wiki.mahara.org, you do a search there for plugins. There's a whole bunch of cool plugins that are there, and the one I'm showing you in just a second is called the Assignment plugin for Moodle 2. All right, so as a student, I've created this fantastic page. My teacher wants it to be assessed. Well, all my teacher has to do is create a special assignment. The plugin I'm talking about is called the Mahara Assignment. Mahara Assignment, you've got upload file assignment where the students upload a file. You've got the online text assignment where the students type in text. The Mahara Assignment does the following. As a student, I'm clicking on the assignment my teacher set up, and it's showing me all the pages that I've created in my portfolio. I can choose which page I wish to submit to my teacher. I want to submit that one. That's it. And the cool thing about it is, first of all, the page has been submitted. My teacher will now see it, and I'm going to go back to the teacher view in just a second. But also it's going to lock the page, so I can't keep making changes to that. It also immediately gives teachers the rights to access it. It's all transparent to make sure that teachers can now easily get to that part of the portfolio. And me as a student, I'm the one who created the page, knowing that I'm submitting this to be assessed, and we're keeping the clear lines. Moodle is the e-learning structured area where assessment takes place. Mahara is the place that reflection and portfolio takes place. Oh, part of my portfolio has to be assessed. Fine, you submit that element of it to Moodle where it's going to be assessed. It keeps that clear, distinct line of separation, which is really important. At least I believe is really important. All right, let's log out. Log back in as my teacher. What's the teacher going to see now? Well, Steve, I guess is the point I'm trying to make at the moment. What we're actually doing right now with the plugin gives you both elements. And by the way, feel free to disagree. Some people believe that portfolio is for assessment. I personally don't, and I guess the passion in my voice makes that rather clear. But I also completely understand how we can use portfolio for summative credit. Absolutely. So what I like about what I'm showing you is this is exactly how I do it. I actually go through and I create the task in Moodle where my assessment takes place, where my gradebook is kept, where my outcomes are listed. And then the students will submit it from Mahara, and they'll submit the part they want to be assessed. I don't want to be assessed on everything I'm reflecting on. You want to know about X? I'm going to submit to you the things about X so you can reflect on that. All right, so here I'm as a teacher, going back to my Moodle Mahara assignment. As a teacher now, I'm clicking on the Mahara assignment, and I can see, if I look at the view submitted assignments, one, there's a whole bunch of different students, and where is he? William Hartnell has submitted the project page. Fantastic, let's go check it out. Well, as a teacher, I just click on the link, and it's taking me straight to their project page. I'm viewing that element of the portfolio that they've chosen to submit. And I can view it, and I said, be it for summative credit or what other process I need to be doing here, or I can go through and say, yes, I agree with all of that, or I don't agree with it. And then I can give it a grade. Yes, this was worth 65. He's competent, advanced beginner, and his class behaviour's been medium. Great work. Again, it's worth pointing out that the assessment's happening in Moodle, the feedback's happening in Moodle. It's going into their Moodle gradebook. It's all still nicely contained, but yet still getting the power of both systems. That's it. I've now gone through and performed my assessment. So just to show off the last step, if I first of all log back in as a student, I've been assessed. If the teacher had chosen to, I would have received my email, but I can, of course, look at my gradebook. There's Mahara assignment. Great work, 65, and again, that could be a reflective statement, it could be a summative credit, it could, whatever task you dream up. And again, sometimes I just like using this because my background, I should have mentioned at the beginning, my background is childhood education. I worked in the K-12 sector. I used to spend 2 lessons teaching students Dreamweaver for a task that wasn't about using Dreamweaver. The task was about creating a web page. But I'd lose 2 lessons, 3 lessons in Dreamweaver. Teaching a student how to use Mahara takes half a lesson. And so we'd go through and create pages there. No code was needed. It was just click and drag interface. And so even if it wasn't a portfolio practice, I'd still often say, great, we'll go to Mahara and create a view about ponies, a view about, sorry, views the old words from 1.4. We call them pages now. Create a page about, X, Y, or Z. It's also a great way of saving some time. So now I can go through, I can see the feedback my teacher gave me. And then if I go back and check out my portfolio, and this is the part that might fail, by the way. I sadly didn't get a chance to test this. But if I go back now to my portfolio, see how it's put, it's not showing it. If you have a recent version of the code, it will also bring the outcomes. You saw that when I marked the student, I marked them against a certain set of outcomes, competency and if they're on time or not. Those outcomes can also come across into their portfolio. Sadly, the version I have here at the moment isn't good for that. But trust me, that normally works on a system that's not mucked around with as much as mine. So I guess before continuing, what I wanted to show you here is how these systems are starting to cross over. First of all, you notice they were working as one system. They weren't working as separate entities. They were actually working as one. Just a simple click took me between one and the other. In fact, in some of those cases, the process was really simple. I was marking. I just clicked on the item to mark. It took me to Mahara, and then it took me back to do the mark. As a student, I just clicked on Portfolio. It took me to Portfolio. One click took me back to the course. How they interact is completely up to you. The last thing I was going to show, some organisations like these things to look separate. Me personally, and again, I've got to be very careful how I say this next statement because I understand that what you're doing with it determines much of this next statement. But I actually like my portfolio to look like part of my e-learning system. I don't want students to think of these things as separate processes. They're just separate types of tasks. And so the last thing I'm going to show you here is that Mahara has a fantastic theming engine, just like Moodle. So I'm actually going to change the theme of this course. We've actually got this theme in both sides. So just give me 5 seconds here. Just as a teacher, I'm changing my theme to, what is it, Notepad. If you want to, you can even make the systems look identical. Look at Moodle right now. This is my course. This is a theme I've put together here called Notepad. I'm clicking on the system here. If I click on Portfolio, the student would never even know they're on a separate system. It's just a click. And so if you need that kind of integration, they've both got fantastic theming engines that even allow you to make them look identical to the pixel if you need to. But again, you might, different reasons you might want it to look separate. You want it to be recognized as a separate portfolio system. I don't want to take away from that. But, for me, we're talking about integration. I want the students just to think of these things as, this is just one area, the way things work. So it's already 3:15. That doesn't take long to fly. Before I talk into how some of these things are put together, I'm very keen to get questions. I made a lot of grandiose statements in this session. I've made some very grand, stereotypical type of statements, might be a better way of putting it. So different questions. Does the latest version of Mahara work on Windows? Absolutely. Mahara, like Moodle, is web-based. It works in any browser. Again, IE6 is pretty much no longer supported. My experience with Mahara on IE6 actually hasn't been too bad, but again, I think Christina can answer that, but I don't think IE6 is on the official support list anymore. But Internet Explorer, Firefox, Chrome, as long as they have a web browser, you've got access. Windows Server, absolutely. The requirements for Mahara are extremely similar to Moodle. They require a web server, ideally Apache, but it will run on IIS. It needs a database. Again, it is ADB compliant. It is better on MySQL or Postgres. And a PHP server. So yes, I have seen Mahara set up on a IIS server. I will, of course, stress that Mahara, like Moodle, is built by open source people. It's built by open source developers. It is built by default to work better with open source solutions. It's not because they're elitist or they're being geeky. Just the reality is that people who choose open source often do it because of that openness. So yeah, you will usually get a far better experience, on an Apache and the Linux environment, but it will work on IIS. Any other questions? Well, I didn't want to go too techie just yet. I'm going to go into the techie side for the last 10 minutes. I just want to get more questions around like the pedagogical implication or the methodology. I completely agree, Natalie. You've probably picked up that I'm a talker. In the classroom, I love classroom discussion. I love debate. I used to sit in the HESI department when modern and ancient history, and it's fantastic. And Moodle for me was an extension of that. Lots of forums, lots of wikis, lots of discussion. Steve, the answer is quite simple, I find. And again, I apologise for the stereotypical response on this, but a task has to have context and the task needs to be engaging. I found if I created things that people wanted to talk about, they did. Look at the iMoot social lounge, for instance. I actually went through. Can you see it working in New South? I'll come to that in a second, Lynn. That's a very good question. I want to make sure I talk about that. Yeah, you have to have discussions that they want to start. It's the same way in a classroom environment. If I said, okay, can anybody tell me about how contracting and procurement is impacted in the federal government scoping process? Very few people are going to join in on that. So yeah, I know it's a hard subject, and again, it depends on your cohort and depends on the environment. There are so many different things there, but I often find that many forums, they put together these matter-of-fact questions that are termed so boring. Students don't want to engage with it. Now, can you see it working in New South Wales High School? Lynn, that's a very good question. It is working in a few high schools right now, but gee, it takes a lot of faith from the higher-ups. The following statements are true. A student could put anything into Mahara. A student can type anything into Mahara. It does not go through an approval process. However, anything in Mahara can be reported. You do have teacher and admin rights to be able to go through and assess it and check it and search it. But yes, students could do all these things. Yes, it logs. Absolutely, it logs. But having said that, yeah, saying Nature's Riverview. Riverview was actually the school I was last at. And so one of the things I did before I left there about 4 years ago, was putting in Moodle and Mahara and putting in the integration. And it was a 1.4, I think, back then. But I can list a good dozen schools, including some state schools in New South Wales that are using it. Yeah, no, they aren't DET. I can tease some DET schools as well. I probably shouldn't mention them on an international chat like this, but schools that I've worked with, New South Wales DET, 5 schools using Mahara. It has to have faith from the higher ups. Now, here's the reality. All those statements I said before are scary, but true. But here's the reality. DET, sorry, the public schools, Christina, public schools. But the following statements are also true. Everything in Mahara is logged. Everything in Mahara has their name, their face next to it, their date next to it. The reason this is such a big deal, a student will I keep saying student, it could be a child or an adult. They can muck around in a classroom environment because they might get away with it. You won't hear me, it's my word against yours. And adults can sadly be just as bad as children. On the online environment, everything that I do has my picture, the date. It is me. It's my identity all over it. If I do something incorrect here, the chances of me being caught are 99%. Okay, what if a student chooses to upload a pornographic image and they don't share it with anybody? Well, if they upload it and don't share it with anybody, then it's not necessarily a bad thing. I'm not trying to advocate student uploading porn into a system like this, and please don't misread that statement. But I want to make sure that when people have these discussions, and these are the very things I talk about when I talk with headmasters and principals so much, is that it's not increasing risk. If anything, it decreases risk. And the next thing I talk about is my Facebook statement. Students want to keep the material they're proud of. They will. And all your students, adult or children, including those under 16, probably have a Facebook account. Why don't we provide an environment that's safe? The state schools that we've put it into often choose to use it because it actually allows them to go to parents, the Parents and Friends Associations and to their council boards and say, not only are we not ignoring the Facebook phenomenon, we're actually providing a place that's safe for our students to create their own social networks. And again, please, I'm not going to harp on about it now. Christina will in her session. There's a whole social networking element to Mahara, groups, and they can have walls and they can share, things with other friends and peers. But we can do it all inside our organization with logins just from our organization. In schools, that just rings these fantastic bells of, oh, well, we can actually answer those questions. We can say we're being productive and being forthcoming. And of course, if a student puts a picture of themselves in a compromising position on Facebook, we can't do anything about it. If they put a compromising photo inside Moodle or inside Mahara, we can do something about it. So for all the perceived negatives, and I just say perceived negatives because they are true, that's how it's perceived. The exact opposite is true of all the statements. Yes, they could do all those things, but we can control it. We can react to it. Where if we don't have tools like this, they'll do it elsewhere and we can't control. Now, it sounds like a very negative statement, and it's also, I do apologize, obviously very mid-20s and under focused. Adults aren't quite that bad. But that's how it gets into schools. And the schools who are using it are very happy with it at the moment. All right, I've got, what time is it already? Sorry, 3:25. One more question. Otherwise, I just want to show how it was set up. Okay, not seeing any questions there. How is this set up? Let me quickly again log out. You notice when I click log out, it takes me straight back to my Moodle and logs me out. They're acting as one system here. This is a very generalized approach, but I want you to be aware of what was involved here. Mahara and Moodle are separate systems, separate pieces of software. They can even be, if you want, on separate servers or the same servers. But what we do is we use a tool in Moodle called Moodle Networking. Now, again, I'm going to be very quick here, but for admins in the room, it'll give you an idea of where to look for these things. In Moodle 2, we've got plugins in our system admin area. Actually, before I go into plugins, sorry, we have networking, manage peers. Networking is the ability to be able to hook systems up together. First of all, we turn it on, and then you see I've actually registered a host, mahara.pukunui.com. I've actually gone through and registered my Mahara site as a potential peer. And we do the same thing on the other end. In Mahara, I'm logging in as an admin now, under site administration, we pretty much have the reverse of that process. We have an area called networking, where again I can now go through, make sure it's turned on. And then I'm rushing this for show the steps. We have a thing called institutions. Institutions are different groups that can have access to Mahara. And in my institution here, I have set up my Moodle site. Now I want to show this as well very briefly. See this? This is a huge key. Both Moodle and Mahara have these keys. Every piece of information sent between the two systems is encrypted and decrypted with these keys. And these keys replace themselves every 21 days. The chances of data being intercepted between the two systems is incredibly remote. Incredibly remote. I never say impossible with the web, but will certainly be very difficult to do. So once you've networked the two tools together, and I'm rushing it, I should actually highlight, if you actually go to the wiki on Mahara, there's some fantastic documentation there. Christina, if I can put you on the spot, could you put a link to the online manual for 1.5? That might help people who are struggling to keep up with this, and to the Moodle documentation. Once you've set up the peering, they're connected to each other, we then go to plugins and we have portfolio, manage portfolios. This is where we can turn on various portfolios, places that students can send in, or users can send information to. You notice that for my demo site, I've enabled file download, I've enabled Google Docs, I've enabled Mahara. There's a whole bunch of other ones as well. Flickr, if they've got photos, they can actually send it to their personal Flickr account. Box.net is a fantastic system doing it free online storage. Picasa, another popular image one. And again, this is a plugin, so people can also write their own. I'm hoping to see a lot more portfolio plugins coming through in the future. So once we've hooked them up, we turn on the portfolio, these things interact. And as I mentioned, the assignment integrator, so I'm jumping ahead of myself. Once you've turned that on, that provides the single sign-on that I showed you, and that provides the system for send to my portfolio that I showed you for anything that a user creates. The extra thing that I showed you, however, was the assignment plugin. that Mahara assignment, you have to get that from the Mahara wiki. So I'm just going to see if I still have that window open. I, of course, closed it, which doesn't actually help. If you go to the Mahara wiki that I brought up earlier, on the plugins page, you can actually download the Mahara assignment and you install that, and also what's called a local plugin. The documentation for that is all on the wiki. The demo I did today, don't get me wrong, I have done this a couple of times before, and I will admit that, but this demo site, the integration and the installation of the plugin took me 15 minutes. Now, if you're learning your way around, it's probably going to take you an hour or so, but it's a very simple process once you follow the instructions to get the two set up. And it's one that I believe is just incredibly valuable. It brings portfolio and assessment together, it keeps the segregation, it provides student-centered practice while also allowing us to have our scaffold. It means we're no longer drawing lines in the sand. We can now support both styles of learning, both styles of educational framework, while letting everybody win. I am definitely out of time. I'm sorry I rushed that last tech bit, but I just want to show those couple of areas for those who are admins who want to know where to go and find these things. Obviously, I'm all over iMoot. There is also a forum in the space that I've set up here in the Moodle space for this session. Please put questions into there. I've set up some demos there. There's a click. You can have a single sign you into the Mahara. I've gone through and set up a Mahara assignment. I've set up a glossary and a forum, so you can explore with it from a student's perspective. And look, I hope that's got you excited enough to at least investigate it, and hopefully excited enough to also check out Christina's session on Mahara 1.5 that will go through this in a lot more depth. All right, so this is a place for anybody who's got questions. Greatly. I was dreading I was going a bit fast there, so I'm glad it made sense at least. I do apologise; it wasn't up to my normal standard. So yeah, I'm glad it worked for you. Oh, great, Anna! I'll go through and start marking it for you. Yeah, it's seamless. The trick of these tools is they're very complex in code and what they do. But from the user's perspective, it should just be intuitive. It should just be a click. And yes, that's what I find they've done. And you can thank Catalyst New Zealand. They wrote that piece of code. It's very well done. You can thank Pukunui for half funding it. Pukunui NetSpot co-funded it, so we'll take some credit. All right, any other questions? Oh, cool, NetSpot's updating it. Sorry, Steve, that's an interesting question. So what do you mean by limitation on student outputs? Can you give that a bit more detail for me? Oh, great, Baz, thanks for that. Absolutely. The Rocket theme is on Moodle.org in the plugins database. So if you just go in the themes area there, you can grab Rocket. I have to show off Rocket. I'm going to go back for a second. I have to warn you that Rocket is very different. If you want to use Rocket, it does some things very differently. I'm just going to share my screen for a second. I kind of enjoyed pushing Moodle to the boundaries of what you can do with a theme. If you're going to use Rocket, it does do some things a little bit different. First of all, on the home page, it actually gives you a lot of different places you can put blocks. This here is actually a block. This here is just a HTML block. You can put blocks in the headers here to give you a lot more. No, I'm not Graham, but I do think a couple of other people are. So do have a look in the program for themes. And so if I actually go into a course here, what's really different about Rocket is how we do editing. Notice that it doesn't have turn editing on. It actually has what's called the edit mode. I get so many people complain to me that turn editing on was an activity, yet they were used to seeing it as a status, especially people who came from Blackboard. So what I've actually done is this is now status. Currently your edit mode is off. And if you click on it, it goes green until the edit mode is on. You'll also notice that with editing turned on, you don't see all the icons in the middle of the screen. What I really loved about this is that I found that when you turn editing on, especially for a new person to Moodle, it's extremely intimidating. So now, when you hover over something, that's when you get the edit for it. There's topic 2, there's add a resource. Oh, sorry, that was topic 1. Topic 2, hover over the label, there are the edit buttons. And hover over a block, there are the edit buttons. So just be aware if you're going to use Rocket that people go through and find it to be quite different. It's not just a look and feel, it does change how Moodle functions. All right, well look, it's near time for our next session to be starting. So thank you very much all for coming. Oh yes, the government world. A world all to itself. Now, thanks for coming, Christina, and thank you for answering those questions too. Anna, if you love that Moodle picture, I'll do a photo later on. I have an entire wall of this office is that picture. So it's what, 2 and a bit meters high, about 5 meters wide. It's a great picture. Bill, again, it comes down to the task you want to do. You can have group work in Mahara if you wish to. Have a group work on a page together and then submit that. Or they can do it individually if it's a video that they each want to keep for themselves. So, Bill, that really comes down to the kind of task that you want to create. No, thanks for coming, Bill. Glad you enjoyed the session. Yes, you can. In fact, nearly the moment the session's finished, if you actually click on the button that says watch the recording, even though it looks like it's the same screen, underneath it, it says recordings, and you can click on it to actually view the recordings right away. They're usually available within 5 minutes of the session ending. Oh, sorry, I've got to read the fine print. Can you download the recordings? Sadly, not by default. Mahara is absolutely Mahara. Can't blame Mahara for that. Adobe Connect is absolutely awful. You actually have to save it as a download from an admin side, and it takes minute for minute. It took us nearly 3 weeks to convert last year's load. So eventually you will be able to download it, but that won't be happening until after the conference is finished. Just sadly a limitation of Adobe Connect there, I'm afraid. No, thanks for coming, Anna. Thank you. Sorry, I need my caffeine now. Bill remembers the hat. The hat is around here somewhere. And trust me, look at this hair at the moment. I need the hat. The hat will be back. Thank you, John. I was assuming hats there, Bill. So, Michelle, I see you've got a raised hand. What can I do for you there? Well, you don't, because Mahara doesn't contain outcomes. Remember, I said no assessment actually happens in Mahara. So Mahara doesn't contain outcomes or grades. They all happen inside Moodle. And what I was trying to show you, and the part that sadly didn't work the way I had anticipated, is that Mahara can show outcomes from Moodle in itself, because often students want to reflect on how they're performing against their outcomes. But yeah, Mahara itself doesn't store any of those things. It's a portfolio tool, not an assessment tool. So yeah, grades don't store in Mahara. So that's why I create an assignment. So using the Mahara Assignment plugin that I showed you, I create a Mahara assignment, and that task is to submit their portfolio for assessment. And students will submit the portfolio, and you mark it in the Mahara assignment, which then puts the grade and the outcomes in Moodle. No, no worries. All right, well, sadly, I must be off. I have to go help make sure the other sessions are running now. So thank you very much for coming, and I hope you guys enjoy the rest of iMoot. I'll see you around.